introduction. We have Jim Walker from the Climate Group. We have, who many of you will know, Yann Arthus-Bertrand, the famous French photographer, if I'm allowed to describe you as such, and Urs Hoelzle, who's our Senior Vice President of Engineering Operations. And Urs has been heading up a program to introduce cleaner energy and greener technology to Google, and that's what he's going to talk to you about this morning and this afternoon, and then there'll be time, as per usual, for questions afterwards. So I'll let them get on with it.
All right. Welcome, everyone. So you might wonder, why am I here? And as Rachel said, I'm responsible for the technical operations at Google, and I'm going to talk to you about our green energy strategies. Now, maybe I'm here because, I like nature, I like dogs, I'm a nice guy, right? And so I can talk to you about these things. But actually, no. That's not the reason. When it comes to energy, I am the villain at Google because my organization is responsible for the majority of energy usage at Google and the majority of carbon dioxide emissions because our technical operations consume the majority of energy at Google. And therefore, I'm here to talk to you about what we are doing about this. And I'm going to show you three different approaches. First, how we address it, our own emissions, so how we cut our own emissions and are becoming carbon neutral. Second, how we work with the industry to make the entire IT industry more efficient. And then third, how we leverage the assets we have in our philanthropic arm to try and influence not just the IT industry, but the entire world. So first, to our own business. Now, the internet per se is pretty low impact technology, right? If you think about it, things you do on the internet are virtual, right? You click the mouse, some message goes over the internet, but it's all relatively low impact, very low energy. And often it's lower energy than the equivalent transaction in the real world. So for example, when you send an email, that uses up less energy, generates less CO2 than sending something in a real mail. Similarly, if you telecommute to work, right, that can reduce emissions. Or if you video conference rather than travel somewhere. So that's good. But on the internet, there's a lot of usage out there, right? There's hundreds of millions of users, lots and lots of different services, and these services are used very extensively. I'm showing just some examples here. And as you know, Google as a business is built on very small actions, not users' clicks on the advertising system. And that generates a large amount of revenue. And similarly, on the internet, very small impact transactions, because there's billions and billions of them every day, actually generate a fair amount of energy usage. And all of that energy usage is, or virtually all of it, is consumed in the data centers that power the internet. And so that's the same for Google, right? Our primary use of energy across the entire company is in our data centers. Now, what's a data center? Data center is basically a fancy name for a building with computers in it, right? So you have a building, has lots and lots and lots of computers in it. There's electricity flowing into the building to power these computers, and then they generate heat, and so there's something, a cooling system that removes that heat again, right? So the building doesn't just keep heating up. That's basically all there is. Now, unfortunately, and there's lots of studies out there that show this, the average data center that's out there in the industry wastes 2/3 of its energy. Right? So that means that of all the energy that goes into the building, only 1/3, and sometimes even less, actually reaches the computers, right, and is used for computing. And 2/3 are used for the building itself, for the cooling, for the lights, for UPS systems, for all kinds of overhead, right? So there's an incredible amount of extra usage beyond the computers themselves that's happening. And over the past several years, this is one of the primary points where we spent a lot of effort to improve that situation for our own data centers. So we created, the world's most advanced and efficient data centers. This was our quote-unquote data center in 1998 at Stanford, just a bunch of machines. And obviously spent a lot of effort since then, and a lot of money and a lot of technology on improving very substantially beyond this. I don't have time today to go into the great technical details. This isn't the place. I'll just show you one way of how we manage to reduce energy consumption. So as I said, a data center is this thing with lots of PCs, lots of servers in it, and they all consume electricity. That electricity generates heat, and you have to remove that heat. And a conventional way of removing that heat is with an air conditioning system. Works just fine, but it's energy intensive. So to remove the heat, you actually have to spend extra electricity in order to run the air conditioning unit. So what we do in our own data centers, to a very large degree, is to not use air conditioning, conventional air conditioning, but use something called evaporative cooling. And evaporative cooling is just a fancy name for using the evaporation of water to cool something. And in a very simplified way, here's what's going on. So in a data center, you have the heat being generated, and the warm water that comes from the data center that's been heated up by the air, by the servers there, flows over a heat exchanger plate, and on the other side of that plate, you pull in water from the outside. That can be gray water, so recycled water, right? Doesn't have to be drinking water. That water cools down, the main water, warms up itself, and then is sent to a cooling tower, where it sort of trickles down in a cooling tower, and because the water's warm, part of it evaporates. And evaporation consumes a lot of energy, in a good way. So this evaporation cools down the water as it trickles down, brings it back to the original temperature, and then that whole cycle can repeat. And through that cooling mechanism and a lot of other work, we've managed to cut energy usage in our data centers by over 50%. Right? So in other words, we're using only half as much energy to run 1,000 computers than the industry average, and we've been able to reduce our power consumption in a data center area by over a factor of 2 through really the very efficient use and the construction of efficient data centers. And as we all know, saving energy is the best approach because it's ultimately the cheapest and most effective way to improve the environment. So that's what we do on our data centers. Obviously, we have a company as well that has offices all over the world. And in these offices, we've also focused on reducing our environmental impact. Doing studies, improving the air conditioning, efficiency of air conditioning there, lighting systems, energy audits, and so on. And I'm going to show you a few more things that we're doing on the corporate side. One big aspect that we're focusing on is transport. So the commute of our employees as they get to work. For example, in the Bay Area, we run the largest shuttle service, employee shuttle service in the United States. It brings over 1,500 employees every day from various areas of the Bay Area to our offices in Mountain View on buses that run on biodiesel. And it's by far actually the largest system, and in fact has more route miles than the Bay Area Rapid Transport subway system. But that's a system that's run entirely by us without public assistance. Similarly, in the US, we give a $5,000 rebate for people who buy a highly efficient car, typically a hybrid car, but basically a car that gets a minimum mileage of 45 miles per gallon, or that's less than 5 liters per 100 kilometers usage. And in Europe, we're giving away free bikes to employees in order to encourage commute without a car to work. Also, we're one of the world's heaviest users of video conferencing in order to reduce travel between our offices. In our headquarters, we also installed what is in the US the largest corporate installation of solar cells. So all these little things you see on the roof here are solar panels. They supply about a third of the energy right now of our headquarters. and make that the largest corporate installation. This is not just a good thing for the environment. This actually is something that makes economic sense for us as well. We believe that our system will amortize itself over about 8 years, and the solar cells themselves last for 25 years. So that's a good investment, right? It's not just good for the environment, but actually it's an investment that makes sense. Beyond that, we're committed, and we are committing here, to creating an additional 50 megawatts of renewable energy. So that's from new sources, right? So from sources that don't exist today, in order to offset the energy that we use in our company. Just for comparison, 50 megawatts is roughly the enough energy to power 50,000 households, so a small village. And on top of that, we've already started internally to use a shadow price for energy to represent the carbon impact of energy in order to encourage internally the use of renewable energies. In addition, I'm very happy to announce today that we are committing ourselves to being carbon neutral starting at the end of this year. And we'll accomplish this in really 3 primary ways. First of all the energy savings programs that I already talked about. That's the biggest single factor that will allow us to go carbon neutral. Second, using renewable energies where possible, the solar cells and others. And then third, by using offset programs. Now, we realize that offset programs are not always ideal, but we believe that they actually help in financing projects that would not otherwise happen that have a beneficial impact on our environment. And so they allow us to be carbon neutral earlier than if we waited until the first 2 measures fully come to bear and offset all of our own emissions. And since we're doing this for the first time, this is the first year of a long-term commitment, really, to being carbon neutral. We really want to get it right. And so we're not just buying offsets somewhere, where we're actually choosing specific projects that we inspect and audit ourselves. And the 3 criteria that we're applying here is, first, of course, is the project that we are financing, does it have real environmental integrity, right? Is it well understood what the mechanism is by which it reduces or eliminates carbon or carbon equivalents like methane? Second, are these restrictions, these reductions, quote unquote, additional? What this means is our contribution, right, as a company, our money that finances a project, is it directly responsible for the project, i.e., would that project not happen otherwise, right? We want to make sure that the offsets that we're purchasing really create an additional reduction, right, and don't finance something that would just happen anyway, right, because otherwise it doesn't count. And then the third one, can we audit, monitor, and verify this project and its emissions reductions, right? So can we really be sure that we can say at the end with confidence that not only did we create the project, right, it happened only because of our offset payment, but then also what we expected to happen actually did happen, and therefore the reduction actually was achieved in practice. So much about our efforts to address our own impact. And now I'm going to go on and tell you a little bit about what we're doing to make the entire entire IT industry more efficient. That matters actually because in the aggregate, the IT industry consumes about roughly 2% of global carbon emissions. And most of that 2% goes into computers, of course. Now, how many computers are there? Well, worldwide, there's about 1 billion computers, right? Almost all of these are personal computers, right? So this tiny white sliver that you see there represents all the servers in the world. There's about 27 million servers in the world in data centers and elsewhere. So this is not just the internet. This is really corporate servers, everything, right? So the vast majority of computers really is PCs, and therefore if we want to do something about reducing the energy usage, we've got to focus not just on the data centers as we've already done, but we've got to focus on everyone's PCs. And to that extent, we started the Climate Savers Computing Initiative that was announced last week. Climate Savers brings together vendors such as IBM, Dell, HP, Lenovo, and others, and technology leaders such as Google, Intel, environmental organizations like WWF, and then primarily users of computers, be they large companies or be they individuals like you. And the goal of the initiative is to halve the power consumption of the average PC by 2010. And that is not a technical problem. That is purely a choice, right? We know exactly how to do it. It's a solved problem. It just needs to happen. So what Climate Savers Computing does is specify a standard and have a brand and then educate consumers and companies and make sure they buy PCs, computers, desktops that follow this standard and that are more efficient than the computers today. If we succeed, actually, let me just explain to you the problem very briefly. So you might think, how can you possibly increase the utilization or the power efficiency of computers today by a factor of 2? Well, the sad story is because today they waste half of their power. Servers a little bit better, but your PC that you have at home wastes half of its power. How does it waste half of its power? Basically with silly things. So here's a very, very simple image of this PC. On the left is your plug. Let's assume it uses 100 watts, right? Now, the first problem is that when this 100 watts comes in, and there's your power supply, on average about 30, 35 watts immediately turn into heat right in that power supply, because that power supply is not efficient. And then internally to the computer, there's something else called voltage regulators. You don't need to know what it means, but the problem is they're also not efficient. So the 70 watt that flows on from the power supply, again, a bunch of it just turns into heat. And so in the end, the power that actually reaches your CPU, the thing that does the useful work, is only half of what came in. And that's a completely solvable problem. At Google, in our servers, we've had 90+% efficient servers since 2003. It wasn't hard to do. It was just a matter of focusing on it, paying a little bit more extra, but that extra paying is offset by the energy usage savings over the lifetime of the computer very quickly. And so we believe that if we are successful in convincing everyone to switch to more efficient PCs and to buy only efficient PCs, that is going to have an incredible impact on the environment. So even with relatively conservative assumptions, we're going to save 54 billion, right? Tons of CO2 per year. That's the equivalent of about 11 million cars not being on the road, or the equivalent of about 65,000 square kilometers of newly planted forest. Right? So I'm from Switzerland. This area is 1.5 times the area of Switzerland. Right? And just by you purchasing an energy-efficient computer and everyone else doing that, we can save as much CO2 as you would by creating a forest that's 1.5 times of Switzerland. And so I'm going to call, take 30 seconds here to really call on you and say, hey, you have to do that yourself. And you should go to your company and say, your company should join the initiative. It's free. All you do is really to commit to saying, yes, if a computer is available that fits my needs, that is energy efficient, that is certified by the Climate Savers Computing Initiative. And you can buy these computers today, right? So they already exist. So I commit to buying only these, right? And so if we all do this, then we can save more energy than Google will ever use in 100 years, right? So just in 1 year here, you'll have more savings than all of Google will literally consume for an entire century, right? So there's a really, really big impact that all of us can do. All right. So now that I talked about the industry, let me talk about the last chapter, how we at Google want to leverage our assets and our strength and influence the world as a whole, beyond just computers. Here's a first example. Google.org, our philanthropic arm, announced yesterday that we purchased a small set of prototype vehicles for what's called a plug-in hybrid. Plug-in hybrid is basically the idea is that you take a hybrid car, so one that has both battery and an engine, and you have a larger battery that you can recharge at home. And so typically you get a reach of about 50 miles or so that allows you to commute to work and back without using fuel, thereby greatly reducing the emissions of that car. The reason we're doing this is to get early experience with these vehicles that right now are just prototype vehicles and accelerate the availability of these vehicles to the public. So we're trying to fasten the introduction of much more efficient vehicles. Similarly, we're going to argue in public to change their attitude on various things. The first one is energy standards. As you've seen with PCs, often energy efficiency isn't being realized for no good reason. So there may be, so people overall underinvest in efficiency because of market distortions or just information gaps, and energy standards that are clearly defined will help make everyone more efficient. Right? And saving energy is really the most effective way to combat global warming in the first place. Second is, second thing we support is what's called renewable portfolio standards. What that means is that a utility, an energy generation company, needs to provide a certain percentage of its energy from renewable sources. If we set such a standard, that will encourage investment in renewable energy, because every utility company out there has to provide 10 or 20% or so of its power from renewable energy. And that will make a big difference. The third one is increased public research, support for research in the energy area. I think it's pretty obvious why this is a good thing. There's really lots still to be done. And then the fourth one is to create a price signal for carbon dioxide emissions. So put a price on carbon, just like we're internally already doing as a shadow price. We believe that as a matter of public policy, there should be such a price signal on carbon. And in this area, we're also going to work with the climate group here. So Jim Walker here is joining us today because we just joined the climate group ourselves as a new member. So to summarize, and the last one, I've almost forgot, is to use our tools, like the products that we offer, in order to educate the public about what is happening. So here, for example, is a satellite image of Lake Chad in 1972, and here's how it looks in 2001. Right? Note the dramatic reduction in the size. Or here is a picture of the Amazon in 1975 and in 2001. Right? And by using our tools to create educational materials, we also believe we can make a big difference. These here were done in connection with the United Nations Environmental Program. But there's much more that we can do in this regard. All right, so to summarize, we're addressing the energy problem and the problem of global warming with really a sequence of steps. And as a result, we want to be more than just carbon neutral. Right? We won't want to just offset our own impact, but we actually, hopefully, will have a positive impact on the larger environment and, in fact, reduce much more carbon than we produce ourselves by first taking care of our own impact, as I said, especially through energy efficiency and renewable energy, but then also to reach out to the world as a whole, make computers more effective everywhere through the Climate Savers Computing Initiative, and working with policymakers and with environmentalists, and in fact with artists everywhere. And so with that, I'm very happy to introduce Jan Arthus Bertrand here, who probably needs no introduction and who probably has done more for the environment with his pictures than anyone else in his room. So Jan, over to you.
Bonjour, bonjour. I'm very happy that Google is an actor in favor of environment. I think I'm also convinced that we must act everybody quickly together, and we have no time to lose at all. You know, the Earth from Above project has changed my life completely. First, you know, I started this project at the Rio conference, and it was the first time I heard about sustainable development, about warming, about the global warming, about so many things. It was the first time I hear about that, so I decided to photograph the Earth. And really this work has completely changed my life. First, I saw that the Earth is really a piece of art. Really, even today, is always for me amazing. And after, I met a lot of scientists on the field, and they are all very worried. So this make me thinking a little bit. I also saw how the NGO work is very important, very, very important. NGO and foundations are doing an incredible work, and they often do what state should be doing. And I speak also about rich country, not only in Africa. And at least I've seen also we have so many poor people. It's not the poverty you see on the TV, you know, the spectacular poverty you see every day. It's just someone who tell you straight in your eyes that his only ambition is to feed his family every day. It's near 2 billion people like that. Even 1 billion is sometimes 2 billion. And for these people, it's not easy every day. And these people are going to suffer about the global warming. They are going to be the first. You know, our weight on the planet today is very, very heavy. When I'm born, we were 2 billion and 300 million. Today, we are 6 billion and 600 million. It's incredible. And you know all the figure, you know the figure. If everybody live like an European, we need 3 planets. We have not enough food, not enough water, not enough petrol, not enough fertile lands, not for everybody. And I speak about an European. If you live like an American, you live 5 planets. It's for you. So, you know, all the picture. My work is to show through what I've seen, make people thinking. This is the beauty of the planet. A small rock in Iceland, amazing place. Bangladesh, you know about global warming, what's happened. Japan, very, very graphic picture, beautiful picture. 80% of energy for 20%. Darfur camp. Himalaya. Malaysia. Palm trees to make biocarburant. It is the last picture of Kilimanjaro without snow, last June. Very strong picture. That's all. Next year, no Google meeting, only visual conference, et no air conditioning. Voilà. Bonsoir.
So I'd like to also briefly introduce Jim Walker from the Climate Group. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we joined the Climate Group last week. and are actually very excited in working with them. And Jim is going to tell you a little bit more about them if you don't know it.
Thanks, Urs. So my name is Jim Walker. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and I'm a co-founder of the Climate Group. We're an international non-governmental organisation. We partner with government and business to help them lead the way on combating climate change. Since 2004, the Climate Group has established a team of 40 professional staff based in London, in New York, in San Francisco, in Melbourne. We opened an office in Beijing this year, and we're shortly to open offices in Delhi and in Hong Kong. And we currently work with 30 corporations and 12 subnational governments internationally, and a network of other partners to help them develop and share best practice to understand the how-to of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. How does a company, how does the government do this? And to communicate successes in addressing climate change. Our members include HSBC Bank, BP, News Corporation, the State of California, New York City. I'm delighted to be here today as Google formally announced as members of the Climate Group. Back when we started the Climate Group a few years ago, with just 3 people in our laptop computers, a bit like Larry and Sergey without the sunshine, we always talked about how good it would be if we could work with Google, and now here we are. The progress and plans announced by Urs today are very encouraging and helps to reinforce what we believe is a vital message, that the solutions to climate change are possible and that they're compatible with good financial performance and business practice. Google's global brand and 380 million users per month place it firmly in the category of a world-shaping organisation. It's at the forefront of the ICT sector that's becoming a defining element in the way that we live our lives. There's also a growing interest in the role of ICT in accelerating solutions to climate change, as Urs said, as a substitute for transport through providing information for better energy management and as a communications tool. The trade-off between ICT's role as a solution and the energy demand associated with its growth is something that the Climate Group and our partners are currently seeking better to understand, but the potential for Google and the ICT sector overall to make a real and positive difference is nevertheless clear. Let's not forget the size of the challenge we face as a civilization, and thank you to Jan for those slides there. We know that the early impacts of climate change are already upon us, and if unchecked, threaten to have serious consequences for our quality of life and for the human and natural systems that are so beautifully depicted by Jan's photographs. Climate change presents us really with a prospect of a series of tipping points. For some, we know it's too late. Climate change has already reached the tipping point for the polar bear population, for example, in the wild. But for others, we know that the tipping point has not yet come, and there is a real chance to avert the worst impacts of climate change. But what needs to happen? Overall, developed nations, the developed world, need to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases by some 60 to 80% by 2050 compared to today. And developing nations, with the help of the West, will need to level off their growth in carbon emissions over the same time scale. To meet these aspirations will require nothing short of a revolution in the way we generate and use energy, starting as soon as possible. And what will enable this revolution to take place? An ambitious international agreement on climate change is undoubtedly part of the solution. And also strong targets and policies in the G8+5 nations at national, state and city level. In addition, investment in the solutions to climate change needs to move from a niche to a mainstream activity, and the general public must become actively engaged in its decisions on its behaviour, on voting and on purchasing. Last but not least, the world's most influential companies need to lead the way in setting targets and understanding how best to reduce our impact on the climate whilst protecting the bottom line. The window of opportunity to put these building blocks in place is small but not too small. Most commentators now agree on 5 to 10 years at the most to put the sort of the targets and the strategies in place to solve climate change. It's a short window of opportunity. All of those building blocks for a low carbon economy are of course linked. Government cannot move too far without the support of voters and business. Individuals are limited by information, ease of access to solutions at an affordable price. And business needs engaged customers, a clear policy framework, and access to investment in order to make the necessary commitments with certainty. The inaction of others is all too often used as an excuse for inaction at home. We've seen business waiting for the signal from governments, government waiting for support from business, and individuals waiting for business and government to sort the problem out. What matters most then is leadership. Every person, every business and every government has the scope within their remit to lead the way for others to follow. And this leadership has the potential to reinforce the action of others. Our philosophy at the Climate Group is that whilst climate change is everyone's challenge, a relatively small number of influential individuals and organisations can play a central role in changing the direction of the world's economy towards a low-carbon model. 100 companies, 15 national governments and 35 regions and cities could together make a real difference in the way that we generate and use energy. And to end on a very encouraging note, we've seen many organisations from this group step up to the plate on climate change in the last few months, from California to News Corporation, from New York City to HSBC Bank, and of course now Google itself. We're also seeing these leaders reinforcing each other's actions. Last summer, Sergey Brin participated in a roundtable with Governor Schwarzenegger, Prime Minister Tony Blair from the UK, and a group of other corporate leaders. And you'll note the Google dress code to the right of the picture that encouraged California to enact Bill AB 32 to support an 80% reduction in California's greenhouse gas emissions. So in closing, I'd like to congratulate Urs and Google today for their leadership on climate change and its aspiration to become carbon neutral, and we look forward to supporting Google's team on their journey. Thanks.
Now, I don't know if anyone has any questions about this, particularly to Urs. If anyone wants to ask any questions, the gentleman in the blue there. If we could go, that would be great. And then go to the back. David Smith afterwards at the back at the Observer.
Hi, I'm John Reynolds from the Sunday Independent in Dublin. Just a couple of very short questions. How fast is Google's carbon footprint growing? And you mentioned that your carbon footprint will be independently certified. Will you be making this data publicly available?
So I guess that's a question for me. We're still in a period of rapid growth. Our user base and the services are growing. And so I'd say, we're probably growing for the foreseeable future in a double-digit percentage per year. And our focus is on, given that we can't choose the popularity, and in fact we'd like it to go up, we focus on the efficiency per se, so how much per user or per transaction or so does it cost to serve you, right? And that's actually one place where our economic interests and our ecological interests are aligned, right? Typically, if we use less energy per request, then that's good for us, not just for the environment. It's true, yes, that we've been working with the ERT to audit our carbon usage. I don't think we will publish the absolute numbers of it, mostly because we are still in a very heavy competition with other companies. And ultimately, as an internet company, your infrastructure that runs the service is one of the key competitive weapons. In fact, none of our competitors either has released these numbers for those reasons. But again, I think, especially in our case where we're growing rapidly, I think the absolute number is less interesting than the efficiency with which we operate. And we do hope to release later this year more details, for example, on the efficiency of our infrastructure in order to really call on others too to focus on handling the load that is coming from our users in the most efficient way possible.
David Smith from the Observer, I think, has got the mic.
Very interested, you mentioned investing in technology, particularly with cars. Is this the first time Google has expanded beyond the web? And could you just tell us a bit about your plans there? You mentioned about even making these available for public consumption. I mean, could Google be at least jointly involved in car selling, and what else might you explore, perhaps an environmental theme?
So I think it's important to realize that this is not a business investment, but it's comes from our philanthropic arm, and we actually have invested in a number of other companies as well that have nothing to do with information technology per se. So this isn't the first time, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last time. Ultimately, I think one of the advantages that we have is we have a very strong team on the Google.org side, but we also have a lot of resources inside the company that we can draw on in order to help Google.org identify sort of really promising new technologies that might have a big impact on the world, reducing carbon emissions. And given that it's Google.org, it's okay if not all of them work out. You have to take a risk in the early stages, and this is just one example of a technology that looks promising, given that most commutes happen in a relatively short distance. These types of cars might really make a big difference in terms of how much carbon output there is from commutes. But then, of course, we're also focusing on eliminating the individual commute too, to the extent possible, through our bus program, for example. So it's not just one solution.
The gentleman there in front of the camera.
Prashant Roy from Cybermedia India. I didn't quite follow what exactly it is you do to make the servers more efficient. I mean, apart from the cooling system, which is separate. Now, I don't know if that alone caused the 50% reduction in, or improvement in efficiency. But, your SMPS would have a similar level of efficiency across. It would be 70, 75. You probably can't exceed that too much. So what do you actually do in there?
So that's actually enough material for at least an hour's talk. But to answer very briefly, the cooling is just one part of making data centers efficient, and there's a number of other innovations that we have deployed in our data centers that increase the overall efficiency end to end. But then, as you said, on the server side, it's just as important to focus on efficiency, because your standard server still wastes a third of its energy, unproductively, and that we've cut down to something more like 7% or so by just working with partners to create more efficient power supplies, for example, more efficient computers per se, and especially on the computer side. But actually, I think even on the data center side, it's not a technology problem, right? It is a choice, really, that people are not making today for whatever reasons, and that we have made, right? And so if you focus on it, then almost anyone can get these kinds of improvements, because there's no magic, technology there, right? This is all stuff that's been understood for at least a decade, if not more. And most people are ignoring that when they build data centers or when they build computers. And we sort of forced our vendors and ourselves to not ignore it. And that's really what makes the difference.
Gentleman in the black T-shirt.
Igor Karen, a question for you. So let's imagine Google wants to set up a data center, say, in Europe. Are there specific conditions that electric utilities need to essentially have or fulfill in order for you guys to consider the region, the city, or any places to be much more attractive than any others?
So if I understand your question is what are the factors that make a particular region or city interesting or not, right, for data center selection? So there's really a whole number of different factors that play in it. Climate, for example, is one of them, because this kind of cooling works better in certain climates than in others. Local workforce, educated workforce, availability of land, water as well. So, for example, the site in Belgium actually has the ability for us to take grey water out of a canal, filter it, and then run it through our cooling tower, so we can avoid the energy usage of having to use drinking water, right? That needs to first prepared, and then purified just to be evaporated, right? So that was a factor there. Tax environment, construction, availability of construction labor, sort of things like that. So it's really, I have a list of 50 probably factors that come up in the decision matrix.
Andrew Edgecliffe-Johnson from the...
Yeah, just for a brief follow-up behind you.
Yeah, I was more specifically referring to this initiative.
The environment one.
Yes.
Yes. So I think there it's primarily the climate, probably, because that's ultimately the biggest impact. That's a location impact on the efficiency of a data center.
Financial Times. When you talk about supporting public policy changes in this area, can you give us an idea of the extent of your the lobbying efforts you envisage? Would they extend to supporting political candidates who agree with this view of the climate change problem and the potential solutions to it?
So I think our support is more for the cause than for particular people. So as Jim, for example, mentioned, Sergey was present at one of the first meetings of the climate group with Governor Schwarzenegger in California. Back then, we were definitely lobbying for the adoption of the Assembly bill that created the carbon targets for California itself. And we've done this in a number of other places. Right? We're doing it here, both by joining the climate group and in private. In the U.S., what you can do as a company to support candidates is limited through various campaign contribution laws, and obviously we have to follow those.
A follow-up on that. Why is that particular public policy aspect coming under Google's aegis rather than the google.org structure?
So Google and Google.org, right, we work very closely together, so I wouldn't draw a hard line between them. And sometimes, so for example, the Climate Savers Computing Initiative came out of Google.com, not Google.org, but in close collaboration with the Google.org people. It was more the kind of people, the people who were involved, rather than the topic per se, right? So we don't actually see this as a, very strong division between the two.
The gentleman in the side there.
I'm Paul from Your Technology, Sweden. Can you name the company that sold you the hybrid cars, the plug-in hybrids?
So there's two things. A, you can't actually buy these cars. These are prototype cars, and it's actually mentioned on our website. It's a battery technology from I think a company called 123 something. I forget exactly. Small company in Canada, I believe. And then another company called High Motion that does the integration in it. But this is just one of the prototypes. We're also supporting another initiative called CalCars. That's based in Palo Alto. That's more of an outreach. Is lots more actually in yesterday's press release. Yes, right. Again, right. This is about trying to accelerate the deployment of this technology to the real market where an average user can go and buy it.
The gentleman over there with the...
Yes, Mr. Alex from Libération, France. Mm-hmm. Maybe my question will seem to you a little bit strange, but I read in the news recently that some big high-tech companies were thinking about localizing some infrastructure like data centers at the north of the planet, in the northern part of the planet, in order to reduce the cost of air conditioning for data centers. So my question is, will the countries in the north, I don't know, like Canada or Scandinavia, or will welcome more and more infrastructures in the future?
That's a good question. And I think hypothetically speaking, you'd be right that, if you go more north, that can be better. But there actually is something as too cold. And in fact, if it's a climate where in the winter it's freezing, it actually becomes harder to make a data center efficient because you then have to deal with the fact that it can be so cold that the water freezes in your cooling tower, which typically forces you to put in an extra cycle with something that's more alcohol-based or so, to, like an antifreeze-based kind of thing, and that makes everything more complicated and less efficient. So really, actually, the best climate is something that, if you do it sort of our way, is something that is a moderate climate. And, Belgium, for example, where we are here in Europe, or Oregon, where we built our first data center in the US, is near ideal climate. So it gets within, 85, 90% of what you can get out of it. And so we're, not going to go to the North Pole in order to go, melt some ice there or something like that.
There's a gentleman at the back standing, and then I think that's probably our last question, unless anyone else has got any others.
Hi, Richard Delavan, the Sunday Tribune from Dublin, Ireland. Just a follow-up question from an earlier one that was asked about factors that might affect whether or not you would site an office or a data center in a particular location. Would the presence or absence of renewables or an energy supplier that offered a renewables mix affect the decision to site a data center or an office? If you understand what I mean by that.
Yes. It does, but only if there is additionality in the sense that if, for example, our presence causes the creation of additional renewable energy. So, to give you one example, what I mean is in Oregon, right, we get all our power from hydropower because we're right next to a dam. I don't think that's particularly green because the energy we're using was already there. And if it weren't us using it, then someone else would. And so by going there, we didn't actually reduce our impact on the environment, right? We could have just as well been somewhere else, and it would have been the same, given that it's a grid and everything's connected and the energy produced there would be used elsewhere. And so what matters is, and that's what we go to with the 50 megawatts that we committed to, is what matters is that additional renewable energy is created so that additional wind turbines or, solar thermal or hydro or, whatever it is, generation is caused by our presence, right? That's really what we are looking for. And clearly, if there's an area where that would be easier to realize, that would make it more attractive.
Great, thank you very much. That's absolutely fantastic.
All right, thank you very much.